Alright, hello everybody, welcome back to some more Fury of Dracula. We're taking a little break from all the serious gameplay from the European and American leagues for the spring regional competition. I mean, this is going to be a serious game too, but it's going to be a friendly game, and going back to sort of those community-style videos that I've been doing, where I've been interviewing people from our Discord community. Today we got a very, very special guest, because we've basically got, at least from the player's perspective, this is the face of Nomad Games. Basically, this is what you are, Tom. We got Tom from Nomad Games, marketing developer. Is that what's on your Discord? I think, right?
Yes. So basically, all the public-facing stuff that you'll ever see from Nomad, from website, Discord, social media, emails, all the sales stuff, all the publishing side of things. Everything that you'll see on the front-facing Nomad is me. So I'm a man of many, many hats. One of which is
we are
being on the
we are
Discord.
we're extremely honoured that you grace us with your presence on this little channel. So thank you for joining, Tom. So yeah, Tom's just going to join us for we'll play a little game, and we'll just have some chat about Fury of Dracula stuff. Obviously, the game I'm sure the game will produce some stuff for us to talk about as well, but also just like stuff about the inner goings on at Nomad and all that sort of stuff.
Yes, I'm here to be bombarded with questions, answer those questions, and try and survive as Dracula.
So before we start, though, we have to do your favourite segment. It is Scot-sword and Tom have brought drinks to the stream, but what drinks did they bring this time?
Exactly. So anyone that doesn't know, when I do the Nomad Games streams, I'll often bring a drink because there's a lot of chatting, and I don't want my throat to get all dried out. So I'll bring a drink, and today, I can't normally I'll hold it up and ask anyone, give any guesses. But today I've got a blood orange tea to go with the Dracula theme.
Very appropriate, yeah. I am not so thematically appropriate. I've just got a little bit posh today. I've gone for a Chelsea breakfast tea. When I was over in the UK in the summer, I had to go and get some tea because trying to find good tea here is a little bit awkward sometimes.
Yeah. We're quite blessed here in the UK. If you go down the tea aisle in your local supermarket, it'll be absolutely rammed with tea choices.
I did find. I mean, to be fair, they do have PG tips and Twinings here. I'm more of a Twinings guy. Sorry, people. All the British is like, oh god, elitist so and so.
To be fair, I'm not that fussed. As long as it's a kind of tea, I'll probably be alright with it.
So this is now going to be now a very sort of like judgmental question. Are you one of those guys who like just dips the tea bag into the water for like a split second, or are you one who like stews it for quite a while?
I'm happy with either, to be honest. Like, I've had plenty of teas where I've needed to go somewhere in 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh, but I can't not have tea, so I'm going to have that. But with my memory the way it is, I'll often get distracted by something. And I'm like, oh, I've left that tea bag in there for a good 15 minutes, but that's all right.
I think my worst. I left it for I left tea once for about an hour, with the tea bag still in the kitchen because it wasn't beside me. Like, I've always made that mistake. I'm like, no, I've had to learn from my mistakes and make sure I bring the tea to where I am. Otherwise, just asking for it to be forgotten.
Yeah, we're doing some decorating in the house, and twice in the same day, I left tea until it got cold, and then I was like,
no.
Microwave tea is just not the same.
No.
It's not the word, but not the same.
No, it's not.
No. Not as much as this is a great little tea podcast, as it's becoming. Should we talk about some Fury of Dracula?
We can, yeah. So the first thing I was going to ask you was just more about you. How, because obviously, you know, I try to remember from the streams that you've done some other stuff in terms of like you worked at other companies. How did you get into the whole sort of video game, digital board game sort of realm, was that your interest initially, and you tried to find job opportunities in that, or did you study like marketing and then just by coincidence you got into this sort of industry? Like, how did it all sort of transpire?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of. It's been a bit of a mix of I've known the general direction that I've wanted to go in, but also things have just very luckily fallen into place. So when I first started out, I was focused on writing and did that for a housing association, not for profit, here in the UK. Did that for about 2 years, I want to say. That was my first proper job. And I think I quickly realised that while I could do the job, if it wasn't something that I was interested in, quickly lost interest. And then after that, I worked for a company called GSN Games, who do social casino, which for anyone that doesn't know is basically free-to-play mobile slot machine games, which is very interesting. It was like games adjacent, but a lot of the things carried over. And I worked there for like 2 years or so. And then after about 2 years, because this was a big global company, I was told that the marketing team was being restructured. And part of that restructure was they were moving the entire marketing team to Israel. So I was given the choice of you can either be made redundant, or you could move to Israel, which was quite a big decision.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
Very defining choice, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And obviously, I chose to not move to Israel, and instead stayed in the UK, because the job was good, but I don't think it was move your entire life to another country
kind of job, right?
Yeah. So I basically bummed around for a little bit after that on the redundancy, and then started applying for some places because I'd been basically GSN had been very games adjacent, which meant I got a good leg into the games industry because a lot of the stuff that I was working on could be applied to games as we traditionally know them. And then after applying for a number of different places, I got an offer at Nomad. And the rest is history. I moved from London to Lim, which is where the office is based, up near Manchester. And then lockdown happened, so I moved to the other side of Manchester, but kept working at Nomad. And I've been with Nomad now for 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've always been a very, very big gamer. Like, that's always been my number one hobby. And I've also been quite into board games. Not as much as digital games, but I've always enjoyed board games. And I think that's only increased while I've been at Nomad, and while you've had the rise of so many good board games over the last few years, like board game cafes and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's my life story.
There we go. I should have said that is your life. This is your life before it. I did. It all kind of worked out in its strange way. Yeah.
I think
go.
if I hadn't been made redundant or I had moved to Israel, I obviously wouldn't be working at Nomad. But I have been given the opportunity to do that, and that's worked out quite well.
Oh, that's the title of the video sorted. Israel's loss, our gain, right? How close do you think you really were to actually going?
I think not very, to be honest. I think once I actually stopped and thought about it, I think if it had been for a different job, or
Hmm.
if it had been like if Nomad Games decided to move to Israel, that would have been a different conversation. But I think it's always that job had always been in the back of my mind, a bit of a stepping stone to somewhere like Nomad. Um, so yeah, I don't think I was ever properly considering it. But it's interesting to think about how my life would have drastically changed if I'd done that.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, what do I do?
Another spicy question for me.
Yeah, favorite games in terms of just like in general across your life, because you said you like digital games and board games also. Is there any in particular that really stand out? It doesn't have to be Nomad games, just like anything.
Yeah, this is where I turn and I'm like, oh yeah, Fury of Dracula is my favourite game of all time.
Hey, there we go.
Uh, no, I think I've always had quite a not eclectic, but I've always had a very varied um, range of different games that I'm happy to play. My favourite game of all time, it often changes, but I still think this is the one that comes out on top most of the time, is Resident Evil 4.
Hmm.
It's just such a well-paced, just amazing game in terms of both mechanics. The story's massively enjoyable. It perfectly draws the line between horror and campness that I really enjoy. And I've owned it on how many platforms have I actually owned it on? Two, three, four,
Oh,
five,
that's dedication.
5 platforms, I think. So yeah, there's some.
Yeah, you like it a little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Um, I would yeet myself into the sea.
Oh, I
While
did not
having that
expect.
conversation. Yeah, I think that's the one that I consistently come back to as my favorite game of all time. I've still not played the remake, which I'm quite excited for, but not got around to that quite yet. Yeah, I think that's my fave. In terms of board games, um, I really enjoy Wingspan. Like, I'm a big
Oh,
Wingspan fan. Um, I think that's the one I tend to bust out the most. Um, but I also really enjoy. It was a weird one because I suppose you could technically class it as a board game, but it's more of a trading card game. I'm a really big Magic the Gathering player.
oh, really?
Um,
Oh, very
yeah,
good.
so um, before lockdown, I used to go up and down Europe, just like Dracula, playing in tournaments across Europe.
Really?
Which was quite fun. We usually be a fairly like medium-sized group of us that would go to different tournaments in like France and Spain. And even if we did terribly, which sometimes we did, we would at least be in a foreign country and be able to have a fun time there.
Exactly.
Had you staked my vampire?
I
You
did.
son of a gun.
I did. How rude is that?
But yeah, I think that's
Oh wow,
yeah,
very
Resident Evil
good.
4, Magic the Gathering. That's my jam.
And Wingspan, oh, very good. Yeah, Wingspan. I can't remember how I discovered Wingspan. I can't remember because if I saw it on like a board game channel or I saw it in the shop or I can't remember now. But I remember just seeing it. I was like, oh, that looks. I mean, it's a very pretty game. I'm a sucker for like anything that's like remotely like artistically beautiful. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks cool.
Even
um,
if the game isn't perfect, it'll look good on your shelf.
exactly. Yeah. I haven't bought it yet. I did see it, but it's just because it's quite a hefty box. I didn't know if I was going to play it. But now over here, I found a little board game group, so I might introduce it to them at some point. But Ah, very good, very good. And yeah, the Magic Gathering stuff. That sounds pretty cool. All your little adventures that you must have done around.
Oh yeah, I used to go up and down all over the place. It's a good excuse for a holiday because most of the big tournaments take place over a weekend. So you could normally turn up on the Thursday, enjoy a holiday, have a bit of a structure to it because you've got a tournament on the weekend, and then ambush people with bats.
Oh shit! Wow, what is this? I'm never inviting you back again if you carry on with those shenanigans.
You're
Oh.
so welcome. Yeah, I think when it comes to board games and video games, I appreciate a lot of mechanical complexity in my games. I'm a big fan of roguelike card games like Slay the Spire. Anything that I can properly delve deep into, okay, how does this interact with this card? How does this interact with this other card? I'm all there for. Move you back to Sophia so you can enjoy the sights.
Rightly so. So the next one I'm going to ask, because I know you said this before, but I just love the story and I thought it was really, really cool. You said on one of the Twitch streams about how, like, it must have been a response to one of the questions, I think, in the chat. How did Nomad get into the digital edition of Fear of Dracula? How did Nomad get involved with all that?
So there's a bit of a long story behind that goes back before Fury of Dracula was a thing. So what we did was when we first became Nomad, we basically it came out of nowhere, the announcement that the game that Nomad had worked on previously was going to be the last game that studio would make. So all the directors used to work for a company called THQ, which, while they were on the plane to E3 to show the game that they've been working on, the announcement was made that the studio was closing.
Wow.
So they were all like, oh, okay, that's a bit out of nowhere. Yeah, really took me by surprise.
Not what you want to hear, no.
Oh, no, not what you want to hear. So as they were at E3, they were like, okay, well, we need to find something new to do. We've all been let go from the studio that's closed. We need to figure out what to do next. So the founders of Nomad, while they were at E3, they had a fair few contacts and were just chatting to people. And they got to chatting to the people from Games Workshop. So they'd worked with them on some other projects before, and they turned around and they were like, look, we are now officially not a studio, or we don't have the backing of a major studio anymore. We need something to do. We need something to work on. We still want to be in games, but we're not 100% sure what that looks like at the moment. And we talked a bit more to Games Workshop, and the end result of that conversation was Games Workshop were happy to trust the founders of Nomad with the license for Talisman, which is another Games Workshop board game. And that's what really gave Nomad Games its start. So we developed Talisman Digital Edition. That went really well. Really set us up as, okay, this studio knows how to make digital board games. Let me just ambush you with a spy. You're busy telling you our history. Yeah, so we went from losing a our status as a studio to gaining the license for this really beloved board game. And over the years, we made expansions for it. And then once we got to the point where we'd basically finished all of the expansions for Talisman, we worked on a couple of other digital board games, and we were basically in between projects. So I think we'd just finished Mystic Vale, and we were looking for something new to do. So we talked to a number of different studios, a number of different physical board game publishers, and the end result was we talked to Games Workshop, and they said, okay, well, we were very happy with what you did with Talisman. We've got a couple of other like old board game licenses, because Games Workshop used to do that in the 80s before they were taken over by Space Marines. Yeah, they had a couple of different licenses that they were happy for us to take a swing at, and we played a number of them. So we bought physical copies into the Nomad office, played a couple of games, had a bit of internal discussion about, okay, how would we do this? How would we adapt this? And Fury of Dracula was the one that really stood out. I think because we'd never done anything with, like, we'd done a little bit about hidden information. We'd done a couple of games where that was a thing that you could care about, but Fury of Dracula took that to the next level. And I think that was a really interesting challenge for us that we wanted to take on. And again, we had a really good relationship with Games Workshop at that point, so we knew that anything we did with Fury of Dracula, or anything we had questions about, or anything that we wanted to do, they'd be really happy for us to at least discuss that with them. Sometimes when you're making a digital board game adaptation, company that you're working with will be very, not strict, but they'll be very, this is exactly how we want it. We want this level of approval. You're allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to do this. And that's just what they'll say. But like I said, because we've worked with Games Workshop on titles previously, we had a really good relationship with them, and we knew exactly what they would want and what they'd want to avoid when it came to Fury of Dracula. So yeah, I think that's... And then obviously we've worked on Fury of Dracula for about 2 years, I want to say. I'm trying to remember, because Fury of Dracula was the first game that I was involved with at Nomad, where I was part of the process from start to finish. So when I joined Nomad, we were still putting out expansions for titles that I'd not worked on, but Fury of Dracula was the first, like, okay, I'm here at the beginning, I'm here at the release. So I think it'll always have a very special place in my heart, because it is the very first game that I've worked on from start to finish as someone working in the games industry. And yeah, I think that's the story of how we got involved with Fury of Dracula Digital Edition.
So then the process was about, from the initial sort of sit down playing the game up until release, was, you said, about 2 years, you reckon?
I think so. Because there's quite a lot involved with making sure that you need to make sure that the game that you're going to make is worth putting your time into.
Sure.
You need to make sure that, like, we have a long design process, because when you're making a digital board game, you need to make sure that all the information is going to be displayed correctly. You need to work out how you're going to display that information to players on a digital screen in a way that makes sense, given that the people who originally designed the game probably never had to think that way. Does
Sure.
that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, if you're playing the physical version of Fury of Dracula, obviously you have the boards that you can put that up in front of Dracula and hide that information. But if you only got one screen to work with, how do you make that work? Which is an interesting challenge. So yeah, we probably had about, I'd say, 3 months of design and art team like prototyping of what it could look like, how we could do it, and trying to really wrap our heads around the rules of the game and how it would work. And then from then on, it was just getting a working prototype going, figuring out how we could make the game work, and then actually going from there.
There's a thing that came up in the Twitch stream. The fact there's so much hidden information. That's a very unique challenge. But that's what drew me to the game initially, because I'd never seen a game with so much hidden information, and I just thought that was like the draw for me. Try to from a coding perspective, that must be kind of a very difficult challenge to overcome.
Yeah, it's one of those things where because you've got information that is what's the best way to phrase it? Because you've got information that is conditionally hidden, I suppose would be the best way of describing it, because you have information that some players will know and other players won't, and you'll have information that at certain points players will have access to and then have access removed from. It can be quite difficult to make sure we're not showing you anything that shouldn't be shown. It was quite a difficult challenge. But I think it's one of those things that we've got so much experience over the 10 plus years we've been working in digital board games that have pushing ourselves as a studio like that was something that we really wanted to do. And yeah, when we were playing early prototypes of Fury of Dracula, we made it so that everything could be seen all at once, just to make sure that everything was working as it should, which is quite interesting because it meant that it was a very, very different game. Obviously, Dracula had the absolute worst time.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I was like, oh, so you're doing that, I see. Yeah, we ended up implementing all of the hidden information that we needed, but it took a long time to make sure that we got everything right.
I mean, even from just a physical board game player's perspective, the fact that there's two separate rule books. There's so many rules that I didn't know. There's so many things about fog I hadn't realized. I thought fog just nobody can leave or enter or leave the city. No, it blocks combat. You can't search and all this sort of things. I didn't even know those rules because I just hit in the rules references. It's not the thickest book, but you know what I mean. There's so much stuff, additional rules that maybe you're not aware of initially.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the things that we always come across when we're adapting a board game. And one of the things that not only came up in Fury of Dracula during development, but also still comes up quite a bit, to be fair, in discussions on Nomad Discord or on the Fury Tournament Discord that you've set up. People will discuss the rules, because I think one of the, not a downside, but one of the things that makes it really difficult for us as a game developer is there's a lot of rules in Fury of Dracula that are a bit ambiguous.
Yep.
So when you're writing the rules for a board game, if there's something that has been left a bit ambiguous, normally it's not too much of an issue because, well, if you're playing the physical board game and there's something that you're not 100% sure on, you can normally just leave it up to the players to interpret how they want. As long as they're consistent with it,
Yeah.
it's not normally a problem. Like you can just house rule it on the fly. But the issue with a digital adaptation is you really need to make sure that the game consistently reacts to everything that the player is doing. You need to make sure that the rules are implemented exactly as they should be. Oh no. Speaking of bug. Yeah, you need to make sure the rules are implemented exactly as they should be and implemented one-to-one how you expect them to go. The issue that we come across is when you have those times of the game being a bit ambiguous in what you should do in these very specific situations, we have to act on what we think is the best way, or the way that I describe it is we have to think about the spirit of the game.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think about what the designer's original intent was. So, for example, we had some discussions on the Discord recently about wolf form and consecrated ground.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up.
Yeah. So, it's in the rule book for the physical game. It is mainly clear, but there is still a bit of ambiguity, which is fine because the players can just house rule it, do it how they want. When you're playing a physical game, you can just
wing it. Yeah.
However you want to do it, you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Digitally, you don't have that luxury. You need to make a choice.
And it's always going to be the way you're going to be damned if you do, damned if you don't. Whichever way you pick, there's always going to be a certain section of the community like, oh no, it should be done this way.
Yeah, we understand that and appreciate that. I think for us, it's how do we make sure that what we're doing lines up with what the designers originally intended. Like, we don't want people to think that we are just making arbitrary decisions about what we have, what we've done, and what we don't want to do. If that makes sense. Like, we don't want people to go, oh, you've clearly just done this because it's the easy option. You've clearly done this because it's easier than trying to program this to happen. That's not what we want to do, and I don't think that's what we have done. I think it's just, like you said, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But we have to take the theming into account for things like that, like wolf form out of consecrated ground. We have to think about, okay, well, if there isn't a specific ruling for that, how does it work with other cards? How does it work with other interactions? And why would it be different in this situation? And that's my story.
I can definitely see with a ruling like that. I mean, that's come up in the Discord where it has been written in a way that is deliberately ambiguous.
Yeah.
And I wrote something like kind of an alternative phrasing that could have been used. If wolf form, I will always stand on the perspective that you can wolf form out of consecrated ground. If it was intended to be banned, then that's okay. But there are much simpler ways it could have been written to avoid all of that problem.
100%. Like if it's been omitted, or if no one's put that in the game already, well, you had the opportunity to put in that ruling if that was going to be a concern. But if you've not put it in, we're going to interpret it as you're not too worried.
Yeah. I think it's easy. I think it's easy in hindsight because I've also seen it with like the whole sort of competition, like writing of the information and whatever. The the information that I've written might sit properly in my head and go, oh yeah, that's clearly what that means. But then I've had other people contact me going, what is this supposed to mean? I'm like, okay, so maybe it's one of these things where if it gets, you almost need to get a lot. I mean, I know games go for a lot of sort of testing and proofreading or whatever, but you need that sort of outside perspective because it takes that for people to come along and go, is that how that's supposed to work?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that we really found with Fury of Dracula is that as time has gone on, there has been more of a discussion about how do these rules interact, because more of those niche interactions are occurring. So obviously, with the size of the team that we have here at Nomad, there's a certain amount of testing that we could do. But getting to the point where you would wolf form out of consecrated ground and then have the discussion as to whether or not that is okay within the rules is not going to come up when you're busy making sure that the game works as it should. That's the thing. And we fully understand that there's things that we're not going to pick up as people that aren't, like, obviously we're super invested in the game. We care about it a lot, but we aren't going to play the hundreds and hundreds of hours that you guys are. And I think the thing, when you've got a lot more riding on the game, if that makes sense, like if you're competing in the Fury of Dracula tournament and you are one choice away from getting your victory, and because of how the rules technically interact, which is a bit open to interpretation, you then go on to either lose the game or get a bit of a setback. It can feel much bigger,
of course,
in that instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
We totally understand that. Like we get that, it's not ideal to be in that situation, playing the game, and something doesn't work the way that you expect it to. And then, if you turn around and go, oh, well, why isn't it working the way that we expect it to? We can then explain, okay, here's why, here's the decision that we made. And while we appreciate that, technically within the rules, you could interpret it this way, I think most of the things that we've implemented, you can at least argue, hey, look, this is which should probably also work. Like, you can make that argument because that's how we've interpreted it.
Sure.
Yeah, as I've said on the Discord, if we were making a physical board game that we knew we were going to adapt digitally, we would make a 200-page comprehensive PDF about every single interaction, because unlike someone that's making the unlike someone that's making the physical board game, they don't have to worry about how every single interaction is going to go. But for us, we do, which is a benefit, but also can have its downsides when things don't quite line up with how people expect them to.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I feel like I just rambled for a bit.
No, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I've had the same experience. I mean, not so much with Fear of Dracula, just because I haven't played it much in terms of the physical version, but I play on the channel Gloomhaven, and on the digital edition, all of those rules are taken into account. I don't know if anything's right or wrong based upon. Okay. I mean, I'll say yes, and I'll do a little bit of this, I suppose.
Escape.
Yep, Escape. But then I was playing on Tabletop Simulator, playing Gloomhaven with a couple of mates the other day, and we came across a rule, and we were just like, I don't actually quite know how the monsters are supposed to move in this case, and I was searching through the rulebook and searching through the forums, but there was no like specific example that matched the situation. And maybe we were just missing something really obvious, but eventually we just had to go, fuck it, we're going to do it this way, and we'll just be consistent. So eventually you just have to sort of like almost give in a little bit.
Yeah, you do, and I think that's again the issue that we come across making the digital version is, well, you can say, oh well, we'll just do it this way, and as long as we're consistent, it's fine. We can do that in the digital version, but there will be people that go, oh, actually, I always did it this way in my play group, and I've interpreted it this way. So yeah. Have you got any other spicy Fury of Dracula questions to throw at me?
I do, just to stir the pot, because obviously over the last especially over the last few weeks, especially over Christmas, there was quite a big influx. Especially over the last sort of, with the Easter break and things, there's been quite sort of an influx of new people, which is really, really great, by the way. But obviously, these are new players coming in, and I'm not saying they don't know the inner workings of how Nomad functions and sort of your priorities as a company and all that sort of thing. I'm not expecting them to know necessarily, because obviously, they might not have turned to the Twitch streams or whatever. But obviously you can see in the Discord there's been quite a lot of stuff happening with people saying, when's this going to get fixed? When's this implementation of the rule going to be changed and all this sort of stuff? From a purely sort of company perspective, how do you look at these things? Do you get a little bit sort of frustrated that you're having to sort of defend your decision making, or what's the sort of, how do you feel about it as a sort of from your side?
Well, I think one of the benefits of, as I said at the start of this, I am the only marketing and publishing person here in Nomad. I am the face of Nomad. So it makes it, in some ways, that makes it a lot easier, because I don't need to worry about us being consistent in terms of company messaging, because I know what I've said, I know what I haven't said. So I think that makes it a little bit easier. But from our perspective on Fury of Dracula, so when it comes to how we work as a studio, what we tend to do is we tend to have one big project that is happening at once. And alongside that larger project, we will have a couple of our team working on other different things. So right now, we're working fully on Catan Console Edition. And as a studio, we have a publisher for that game. That publisher will take a amount of revenue from the sales of that, give a percentage to us, but also as part of the contract for making that, we have various deadlines that we need to hit, like milestones in development. And as we hit those milestones, we get paid, which is always good, because that means that we can pay all of our programmers, our QA team, our art team. We can keep everyone in biscuits, which is very important. So for us, we are always working on, like I said, it tends to be, we will work on something large which funds us as a studio and keeps us going. So the issue, the status of games like Fury of Dracula is a bit of a tricky one in the way that we work, because if we are focusing on one game at a time, because that's how we make our money, that's how we keep ourselves afloat as a studio. We have a small team here at Nomad. We recently hired 3 new people. So we've got 3 new starters, all fresh out of university, and they're all going to be working on some cool upcoming projects that I can't talk about just yet.
Oh, you tease. So I was also going to say, like, so those I saw that. So congratulations on the expansion, by the way. Just to put into perspective for people, 3 new employees. What sort of percentage increase is that?
Well, before we had those 3 new people join, we had 15 people here at Nomad, and that's including like the one person that we have that does finance, the CEO, the directors. So that's like a 20% increase if I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
So while a big game studio that has like 200 employees, for them hiring through new people, like that happens every 2-3 months. For us, that's a much bigger shift. Like one of the reasons that we can actually do that, because I don't think we've actually hired 3 people within such a short time frame in the entire history of Nomad. Like in the 10 plus years that we've been working, we've not hired that many people in such a short amount of time. And part of the reason that we could do that is because of the funding that we've got from working on the big project. But like I said, the issue is that because we are, well, the first thing is because we are tied in to the big project that we're working on to continue getting funding, it means that we have to always keep in mind that any time that we don't spend on working on that big project means less money to us as a studio. So, for example, if we are a week later on hitting a certain milestone, hitting a certain build release that needs approval, that's a week later that those funds will be released to us, which we can do a certain amount of time. Like we're not going to be absolutely in dire straits, and we have such a legacy of titles. Like that's part of my job here at Nomad is to make sure that the titles that we've released previously still go in sales, still make us money, still keep us tiding over. But in order to fund our studio, we still need that ongoing development money. So the issue is say, for example, we wanted to do some work on Fury of Dracula. Say we want to go, okay, well, we've got a number of different things that people have requested, a number of different fixes that people want, got a number of different issues that people want to see resolved, and we decide to do that. So in order to do that, we need development resources in terms of programmers. So we have a lead programmer who is the person best equipped to understand what we've done previously in Fury of Dracula and start working on that. So he's also the lead programmer on Catan. So we'd need to take him off Catan, and he'd need time to understand what the bug is, understand what fixes need rolling out, and then actually implement them. If we need any artwork, if we need any user interface changes, we also need to take away our art department, who are a grand total of 2 people, whatever they're doing, and bring them onto Fury of Dracula. For reference, our art department are really critical for us when it comes to. So oftentimes when I'm on streams or putting out the Nomad monthly roundup, I'll talk a lot about the secret projects that we're working on. We normally have a couple of secret projects on the go at any one point. So our team are super key in making sure that we have working prototypes that look good to present to publishers. They'll do a lot of concept work, a lot of prototyping, just to say, okay, if we were to make this digital board game, here's how we would make it look. So if we take away that art resource, that means a delay in terms of how quickly we can get new projects. And if there's a delay in how quickly we can get new projects, that means other people might snap them up. It means less work for us. Like, it doesn't have an immediate effect, but as time goes on, it means less work for us in the future. And then the final thing that we need in order to implement anything in Fury of Dracula is our quality assurance team. So these are the guys that, after anything's been changed in the game, they will roll out the new version and test it internally. So they make sure that everything works as it should. They report any bugs. They report anything that needs fixing to our team, who then can work on it and who then can roll out a fix based on their feedback. And then that process keeps going on until the game is working as we want it to. And that can be quite a long process. So yeah, there's quite a lot of steps involved with rolling out anything, basically. I think given that we also have the game on Steam, mobile, and on Xbox and PlayStation, we also have multiple different versions that can behave slightly differently. Not because of anything that we are doing differently, but just because of how those platforms work. So, like, we could roll out a fix onto. I'm also going to play a card because I've been sat not doing anything for.
That's okay. Don't you worry. It's a really important chat to have, so it's no problem.
Yeah. So that process, even though, say for example, we wanted to roll out one small fix for something in Fury, it would still be a many week long process, and it would take resources away from the rest of the company. Like, if we were a company like Electronic Arts, where they have thousands upon thousands of staff, like, you can easily turn around and say, oh well, in order to fix this bug, we need to allocate 5% of our 5% of our team to it for a month. Like, that's not a problem. For us, it would involve allocating 50% of our team to it for more than a month. So something that I mentioned on the Discord is it's understanding what it takes for us to justify rolling out that kind of fix or rolling out that kind of change. And one of the examples that I gave was releasing on a new platform. So previously we released Fury of Dracula on Steam and then mobile, and then after that we released it on PlayStation and Xbox. So when we released the PlayStation and Xbox version, we also released a patch for the Steam and the mobile version, because when you're already working on the game, you're not actively taking away resources from anywhere else, if that makes sense. Like, we were already working on Fury of Dracula. We might as well put some time into fixing these things, because we're not redirecting resources, we're just changing where they're focused. So it's one of those things where, in order to justify spending that time making those changes, thanks for the face.
You're welcome.
In order to justify making those changes, we need to know that spending our time doing that isn't going to properly mess us up in the long run. Like, we don't want to end up 6 months from now saying, "Oh, we missed this deadline and we missed
Yep.
being able to roll out this fix that is super critical because instead we spent time working on this game."
Mhm.
And I had a quick look this morning because I've got access to all of obviously the different store backends to see how well Fury of Dracula is doing financially, because obviously I keep a close eye on that sort of thing, but I'll normally keep an eye on it from month to month. And yeah, Fury of Dracula is doing well. Like, it's not setting the world on fire, but in terms of keeping the lights on and keeping us biscuits, it's doing all right.
Good.
But I don't think it's doing well enough that we'd be able to turn around and say, okay, if we rolled out a fix that takes us a month to work on, which would cost us, because we know how much we pay our employees, obviously, so we can work out literally to the pound how much it would cost us for a month's worth of work. We can't turn around and say, okay, it'll cost us this much to work on it for a month. Will that result in that much more coming into us as a company?
Yep.
And if it doesn't, then it's very hard to justify. Like,
Sure.
I think over the years we have published a number of games and a number of pieces of DLC that haven't set the world on fire, and the development cost has outweighed the amount that we've made on sales. And that's not the worst thing ever, but once that starts to add up, it can become a problem.
Yeah, you can maybe absorb it like once or twice, but once it starts becoming a regular feature, then
Yeah,
that's
you start to downward spiral in a really bad way. And I
Yeah.
think we've learned that that can happen, and that's something that we really want to avoid, which I think is fair. And I think as long as we're like, one of the things that I've always tried to do here at Nomad is be as open and transparent about where we're at as a company, and what's going on internally. Obviously, I can say vaguely that Fury of Dracula is doing well financially, but not well enough to justify, active ongoing development. I can't give you hard numbers, but I can still say that. And yeah, as long as people understand that it's not that we don't want to do it. It's not that we're sitting here saying, "Oh, we just can't be bothered updating the game or rolling out fixes." That's not the case. It's that we have access to that internal data that shows us, while there would be a benefit to doing it, it's not that easy of a decision to make for us. It would involve a lot of risk, long term, which is hard to justify. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't want to just turn around and say, "Oh, we're never going to touch Fear of Dracula again." That's not true. The situation just has to be right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. I think this is really important to realize, because I think I'm not blaming the newcomers to the community. I'm really happy that there are new people who are playing. They seem to show a lot of interest in the game, and they're very passionate about it. I'm really happy about it. But at the same time, there has to be a bit of an understanding. They come in not realizing sort of the scale at which you're operating at, in terms of like company size. I mean, I don't. I mean, yeah. Once you make comparisons to like the likes of EA or whatever, then it's like a complete. But even then, I'm looking at something like one game I was really. I mean, I still am, but I don't play it so much anymore, just because this game takes up way too much of my time. Was a Euro Truck Simulator, and obviously SCS are really sort of like very open company in terms of like showing like their workforce and all this sort of thing. And even then, like they, compared to you guys, different scale, but still, even then, they take so much time to do things and to change things and get things done. It's like, because it takes a lot of work, and I think when your livelihood is on the line,
Yeah.
it's a complete. I mean, sure. I mean, it's very easy for us to sit here as players, as a player base, and go, "Oh, well, this isn't fixed, and this isn't fixed." But at the end of the day, it doesn't affect whether or not, as you said, you got biscuits and tea. You've got, you got the dough coming in.
Yeah, exactly. I think the best example is the fact that we have been able to hire these 3 new
And that's
game
amazing.
developers
That's
straight out of
amazing.
uni.
It's amazing to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, like we wouldn't have been able to do that without the finances that we gained from working on Catan. Like, I know that I massively appreciate not only the chances that I've had in my career, but also like the chances that Nomad have given me. And I think being able to give those 3 new starters like their first games industry role is something that we are massively proud of. And like I said, I think that's something that we've only been able to do because we've been very savvy about the choices that we make as a company. Like, we don't. It's not that we're financially driven because we care only about the money. We are financially driven because we want to be smart about how we do things, because we see so many other companies in the industry or in our sector really struggle and make a handful of games and not be able to last. And I think we've realised just how important it is that you have the ability to last, even if it means that you have to sometimes make tough decisions.
Yeah. And I think it's, as I said, because you're financially driven, so then you can celebrate another 10 years down the line and be like, look how far we've come, and obviously you're building that community along the way. I think that's the thing I really appreciate, that you are open about it and you don't try to duck it. On the Twitch streams, and I mean, I saw that post you put up on the Discord, which pretty much simplified everything. So I'll ask you the question anyway, because I think it's nice to have it on the record, like on video as well. But just the fact you are open about it, and you're just like, yep, we are aware of X number of things. I think that's the thing. I mean, you made the point earlier, and I think that's the thing, because as a community, the fact that the community is growing and the fact there's a tournament, there's more focus on it, and then these little interactions, which, to be honest, how many games are affected by these problems? I don't know what the percentage is, but it's not that high. But as you said,
I think as well, something to keep in mind is I don't want people to feel like they shouldn't raise these things or they shouldn't let us know about these things, because at the end of the day, Fury of Dracula has gone from, like, especially because of the tournaments and the growing community, Fury of Dracula has gone from just being one of our, games that tick along in the background. Like Mystic Vale is a really good example of a game that we've made previously that has done pretty okay, and then just sort of we bring it out every time there's a sale, and sometimes show it some love. We know that no matter how much amount of love that we show it, there's a baseline for how much traction that it can get, just because of the kind of game that it is. But Fury of Dracula is really upping in our estimations in terms of how much people are interested in it, how much people are enjoying it, how active a community that can be involved with the game. And one of the things that we really consider when it comes to what we work on next as a studio is, okay, how much time would it take us to make it, and how much of a positive reaction would there be to it? So if we had to choose between, okay, do we spend another year and a half making a digital adaptation of a board game that we'd have to make from scratch, versus do we take something like Fury of Dracula, which we know does well sales-wise, we know has the potential to make the numbers that we need. Do we, instead of spending a year and a half making a new game, do we spend the 6 months that it takes to bring Fury of Dracula to a new platform? Like, one of the reasons why we were able to bring Fury of Dracula to Xbox and PlayStation was because we could say, no, look, we know there's an audience for this. Like, we know people will enjoy the game. And part of the impact of you guys having such a good community is, it gives weight to that argument, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like from a tournament organizer perspective, obviously, the initial reason for all starting the whole tournament thing in the first place was honestly just have a little bit of fun, and honestly it just raised the question like, oh, who is the best player out of all of us? Let's just have a competition to find out. But it was also, it was also partly inspired by a community that I was never actively involved with, but I just watched it from a Twitch perspective. Was the Age of Empires 3 community, and the way that game, they had the Twitch streams, they created their own community, but then eventually, because Microsoft stopped supporting it and all this sort of thing, they were like, well, why not we do it as a community? Why don't we do it? And then they started doing their own, creating new maps, and they did balance patches and all this sort of thing. And I just saw it as a complete spectator, not getting involved, but I just saw the whole thing just build. And obviously, it's a different scale, it's a different game. As a community, I think maybe Fear of Dracula is not, a household name, but it has a certain sort of cult following. But it's the same thing too. And I was like, well, if that inspires, the community to build, and as a kind of thing, it then makes it, I'm not saying immediately, but at some point, in the future, if as a developing developing studio, you have a little bit more confidence to go, oh right, we can take that risk and fix certain things. We can take time out because we know that it'll be backed up because we've got a bigger community, and that's the only thing too, like from a financial perspective, because any fixes are mostly pandering to sort of the existing player base. Trying to get new sales is going to be hard, but that's why, as hopefully from a community perspective, we can show people, oh look, we're here, we've got a tournament going, we've got an active dialogue with the developing company. That whole thing will just sort of build and hopefully create a nice sort of like cycle where community grows. When you have time, you're able to improve it. That then brings more players in, and the whole thing sort of builds on its own. But obviously, as a individual, I have no timeline for it. From me, you'll never get pressure in terms of like, oh, should be doing this now. I completely understand it from the perspective of, if your livelihoods are on the line, at times you have to make tough decisions about what is right as a studio, and I totally get it. The fact that there's a digital edition in the first place is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, what were you gonna say?
I just said the fact there's a digital edition in the first place caught me off guard because I didn't know about it until February last year, and I just saw it pop up on my YouTube. I was like, the what? There's been a digital edition all this time? Why didn't I find this out before COVID? My lockdown would have been very different otherwise. So yeah, the fact there's a digital edition in the first place, and most games that happen result absolutely fine, no issues. But as you said, the minute it comes into a tournament environment and those small interactions matter, emotions get are heightened because of it, and it might. I'm not saying it gets exaggerated, but it may be we have to kind of keep a little bit of a more sort of realistic view on it in terms of like how big the problem actually is.
Yeah, and I think like we're not gonna. I don't want to sit here and be like, oh well, you can't criticize Fury of Dracula. I'm more than happy to receive any and all criticisms of Fury of Dracula as an adaptation because, like, I know that because of the way that we will handle that kind of request, that kind of interaction, there's nothing that I'm worried about coming out of that because we'll always be honest about where we're at with development, where we're at with our stance on fixing things or making changes that the community have requested. And all I can hope for is that people can understand where we're coming from.
Yeah. It's not about being in agreement necessarily, because there might be people who sit there and go, well, I don't agree with that. Well, it doesn't really matter if you agree or not, as long as you just appreciate the perspective from your side of things. So I think that's really important, I think. And that's why I was kind of keen in the first place to get you on, just so we can kind of get that out in the open. I mean, it's out in the open anyway, but still, just, this is a resource I can point people to and be like, listen, Tom explains everything here. I think it's really key. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's always been my stance as the face of Nomad. Like honesty is the best policy.
Sure. I think it's kind of easy as a company, especially as you're not a faceless company in the sense, but you could easily hide from it. But the fact you've created the Discord, you've created this environment where people can easily jump in and be like, oh, there's a bug. Oh no, I've got a question. Why is it done this way or whatever? I think it's a testament to that. Most of the people who come into the community, even if they start saying things like, oh, there's a bug, can we fix this or whatever, they normally stick around, which is really cool.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of examples where people have come in just to sort of gripe and then they immediately leave. And I'm kind of like, well, if you're really passionate about the game, you'd still stick around, I feel. That's my gut feeling about it. But
yeah, I think that's the stance that I'll always take. If someone's spending the time to make you aware that there is something that they think is an issue or there's something that they've noticed, they wouldn't do that if they didn't care. That's the thing. Like if they didn't care, they'd just go, oh well, that's a bit annoying, but I'm not going to take the time to write a message or get in touch with the developers. So my baseline is assuming that anyone that's getting in touch is invested, does care, and we should respect that as developers.
As long as there is a positive dialogue from it, rather than just moaning, and then when you try to respond, they just completely bypass that and keep moaning, then, it's like...
Yeah, even then, there's something to be said. Like, I think one of the things that I always take away from those kind of interactions is, even in that situation, the way that people take information in about the games that they play nowadays has changed dramatically. People won't just watch a trailer, play the game, and then be like, okay, cool, that's all I needed. People will go on Discord, people will go on the Steam forums, and even if the person that we're having a discussion with as a developer doesn't see eye to eye to us, doesn't see things the way that we're explaining it, that's okay, because we understand that the discussion that we're having with them is in a public setting, where other people will read those comments, other people will see that discussion, and be able to come to their own conclusions about things.
Right.
People will go, oh, okay, I understand where this person's coming from, but I also understand where the development team's coming from. So even if we're not getting through to that person that we're having that discussion with, we're at least making sure that we present our side of the situation as a developer. Then it's up to the person at that point. That's not something that we can control or want to control, because trying to control that kind of messaging is just impossible, and we know that. So like I said, we will just present as much information as we can about what's going on, either internally or for us as a company. And then it's up to people to make the decision themselves.
So it's beyond the individual sort of correspondence with one person, but it's more about like the big picture and who could see all that in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make sure that you're clearly communicating at all times, and everything that you say lines up with what you said previously. Like, I'm never gonna go on the Discord and say, "Oh yeah, I'll totally fix this bug for you," because that's 100% what we're doing all the time. Because that's not the case, and I don't want people to see conflicting information. I'd rather be as honest as I can. And there will be certain things that I can't talk about, just because I don't want to make promises that we can't keep.
Yep, and that's, I think, as a community, that's arguably, I mean, from an individual perspective, that's worse. I would be more pissed off with a developing company if they were promising lots of stuff and in the end they didn't deliver it.
Yeah, and I know that like it's been a thing recently for larger companies where they will almost dangle a carrot in front of the community in order to get them to do what they want. So a number of high-profile projects have sort of pushed the angle that if you want this fan favorite thing to happen, you should buy this, which isn't something that we're ever going to push, because we don't want to say, oh well, because you didn't buy X number of units of this particular game, we can't justify making the thing that you actually want. And I know that that's how it can sometimes be construed when I discuss, the financial side of it. But I think given the way that we do talk about things, it's much more of a realistic explanation as to why justifying things financially is quite difficult, rather than, if you want us to roll out patches for Fury of Dracula, you need to tell all 10 of your mates to go and buy a copy. That's not what we're doing.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully for the community that's a satisfactory answer.
Yes. If anyone has any other questions, I'm always lurking in the background on the Nomad Discord.
Or if you see any comments on this video, feel free to reply, or in the Discord, whatever you like. Yeah. I think that's the thing, that you're very approachable as a, so which is really either within the channels and stuff. It's also on, you did the Twitch streams and things. I think it's just great.
Like more spicy, garlic flavored questions for me.
No, I think in terms of anything that would be controversial, I think that's it. So yeah, poor hunters have been sitting there for like, Dracula's taking a very long time picking he's going to do in combat. This is very he's very slow in his old age, his old Drac. Don't worry. Yeah. I think this is very worthwhile. So I was going to ask, as a fave, was like, how is Catan doing?
It's going well. We are currently working on a turn timer for online play, which I say as we are currently sat playing a game online where we have not made any moves for however many minutes. But that's something that's been muchly requested by the community. So at the moment we are working very much on getting these community requested features out as soon as possible, which I realise we have spent quite a bit of this discussing the financials behind rolling out community requested features. I think that's a good example of, Catan is a game that we have just released. We are knee deep in development for, and something that we are still receiving finances for actively developing. And yeah, I think for the foreseeable, we are still going to be working on Catan. We're still going to be rolling out patches and doing updates, and we just put out a roadmap. So it's all looking mighty positive. I think it's gone really well for us as a company. It's the biggest in terms of intellectual property. It's the biggest thing that we've worked on as a studio. And like I said, the fact that we've been able to hire 3 new starters
That's amazing.
to work on whatever comes next means that we can hopefully ride this wave into the future. And it's one of those things where if Nomad as a company does well, we can get more resources, we can get more staff, we can more easily justify, because as we increase our staff, it becomes a lot easier to justify doing things like coming back to Fury of Dracula, tightening it up, and sort of rolling out some extra things that, because that's one of the things that I've always made sure people understand is that it's not like we're not listening when it comes to people discussing Fury of Dracula. We very much are, even if we don't have the resources to actively do anything about it. We are still keeping a big list of all the things that people want to see, so that when and if we do get to come back to it, we have that list ready to go. We don't have to start from scratch.
And the cool thing is now, because the community will be, hopefully at that point, when and if it happens, the community will be a larger size, and you can hopefully utilize that community resource also to help you out a little bit.
I think something I've been thinking about as we've been discussing it is, I think Talisman is a really good example of, I imagine, where the Fury of Dracula community want Fury of Dracula to be. Like, Talisman is by far our most popular product. It's one of the reasons that we've been able to release so much DLC for it. And as we speak, we have a Talisman patch that has been in the works for, I think, at least a month, 2 months. And Talisman's, I don't know how much in terms of orders of magnitude more popular than Fury of Dracula, especially in terms of the revenue that it brings in. But even that, we're finding it hard to make the time to dedicate towards putting that patch out. But Fury of Dracula is sneaking up there. As Fury of Dracula gets more and more popular, it will become something that is easier to justify putting the time towards.
That's amazing to hear. That's amazing.
Yeah. Like I said, if we can turn, like, I think the dream, or not the dream, I think the most realistic thing that I can see happening in terms of Fury of Dracula getting fixes or new content or something happening would be a Switch port. Because we've developed for Switch before, we know how that goes. We already have the game built and working on other platforms, so we know what the porting process is like. We just need to make sure that, because obviously, well, I say obviously, Nintendo's got quite a rigorous process when it comes to getting your game on their store, which takes time, takes development time. But in terms of being able to justify doing more work on it from a financial point of view, that's an entirely new platform that we would be able to sell games to people on. Like, we'd be able to sell Fury of Dracula to a whole new market that previously might not pick it up. And like I said previously, while we're working on that port, it gives us a good excuse to say, okay, well, we're already in the code base, we're already making changes. Like, we don't have to get everyone set up on Fury of Dracula. Like, we can make those small changes because we're already going to go through a approval process with QA and all storefronts. I think the only thing that's holding us back from making Fury of Dracula on Switch is that we are wary of how much it would cost to make it, and then how much it would do, how well it would do sales-wise. But as the community gets bigger, as more people get involved, as more eyes get on the game, that decision becomes easier and easier. It's still a very difficult decision. I'm not saying, if we get 100 more people, we'll turn around tomorrow and announce the Nintendo Switch version. But if we're 70% or 70% away from making a Switch version, seeing that there was a active tournament, seeing that the community is really active, pushed us towards 60% away. There's still hurdles, but
of course,
it means if things line up correctly, it makes it easier for us.
Sure. Yeah, good things come to those who wait, right? It's you want to do it at the right time than potentially do something at the wrong time and it gets rushed, or it's not done the way you want, or you're putting yourself at huge risks to do it. I think it's
Yeah, exactly. Like, part of the reason that Fury of Dracula did get released for Xbox and PlayStation was because things lined up really nicely for it. We were in between big projects, and we had a couple of months where we weren't 100% sure what we'd be working on next, and we said, okay, well, if we've got a couple of months, let's do Fury of Dracula on console.
I'm sure, like most studios, you've got a very sort of like, you've got your, obviously you can't reveal anything to me, but you've got a plan for the next X number of months, and you know more or less what's going to happen for that time. Yeah, which is like all companies, but especially for you guys having to think about deadlines and stuff. Yeah, well, I really hope everyone listening has really enjoyed sort of the insight, because I think it's really good to hear. So I'll thank you for doing all that spiel again.
Thanks for having me on and letting me ramble.
What's happening on your screen? Has Mina picked, or is it?
So it's Dracula choose opponent to battle, so I need to choose someone.
Okay.
That's why.
You holding me in suspense. You've selected a card, but who's he going to? Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh.
I'm gonna get punched in the face.
Again, yep. Sorry.
That's all right. No, I massively appreciate you having me on, and letting me ramble, like I said. And yeah, I'm more than happy at any time to chat Fury of Dracula, let everyone know what's going on.
Always happy to have you back. As people have noticed, we haven't really talked about the game very much. To be honest, it doesn't really matter. The game is just a sideshow. Just have something visual on the screen for the folks.
I mean, the sideshow of me getting absolutely destroyed, but
it's third week. You had me running around for a while, and I took ages to get my horses up and running. I only had one horse, and I couldn't get the tickets for ages either. So
we might as well finish on Dracula going out in style,
as he always does.
Exactly.
Speaking of tournament, where are the Nomad folk? Why aren't you in the competition? Why aren't any of the other Nomad people in the competition? What's going on there?
We're all pretty bad.
Ah.
No, I think we've had a couple of people interested, but it's hard to justify in terms of not hard to justify, but what's the best way of describing it? Yeah, it's a mixture of us not being very confident in our theory skills, and not wanting to step on your guys' toes too much. It's a bit weird for us as developers to like, oh, I'm competing in a tournament for the game that I made. I also think for some, especially our QA team, they've spent as many hours as you guys have spent playing Fury of Dracula. They've played that and more. You sort of start to see the code underneath the hood, and it starts to become, oh, this just feels like my job rather than something I'm enjoying.
Yeah. I was like, you kind of like, once you spend all day on it, you kind of don't want to go home and play more of it.
Yeah,
you want a bit of distance from it. Yeah, I understand. Sorry, that was not a serious dig, by the way. That was just more of a joke, more than anything. That was not.
That's all good. That's all good. Awesome.
Well, I'm out of questions, and the game's finished, and I'm out of tea as well. You probably are as well.
Oh yes, very much.
Well, thank you very much for coming on and having a chat.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have to work out what do you want as your avatar on the thumbnail. Do you have any requests?
I'm sure I can bash something together. Normally, when I'm promoting the stream, I will take a picture of my face and Photoshop me onto a Fury of Dracula piece of artwork. So I'm sure I can ping something across to you that you can use.
Perfect. Well, I was going to say, you're very honoured in the sense that I am going to completely disrupt my normal video numbering system. You are going to be a standalone episode with no specific number at all. So I'm also willing, if there is a very specific custom thumbnail one, I am more than willing to abandon my thumbnail what's the word? My thumbnail patterns for you. That's.
Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I'm assuming you'll link to the Nomad Discord.
Absolutely. I will do more than that. I will put a link to all of your Nomad socials and the Twitch and everything. And yeah, the Discord is always in the thumbnail, because I think that's really key for people to realize. Oh, there's a Discord and there's the link for it, and for people so people can find it. Yeah. So I don't know how many people actually find the Discord from my videos yet, because obviously I am very small fish in a very big pond. But I've had, there's been one or two who've come along and said they've been watching my videos, and they've just like, well, that I'm very happy to hear. So hopefully that will keep building. So no, I will put all the links in. So and yeah, do you have any sort of last words for the community? Is there anything as a community that we can do to help you out, or anything you want us to do in particular, or?
I think just generally keep doing what you do. Like, share the game with your friends. Like, tell them that the Nomad Discord's active. Just push more people towards either joining the Discord, or obviously follow us on all the socials so you can keep up with everything that we're doing as a studio. And yeah, just if you've got any feedback, positive or negative, anything you want to tell us about the game, reach out anytime, because that's what we're here for. Like, that's what I'm here for, in order to hear what you guys are saying, because that means that we're much better equipped to understand what we should do next. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Tom, very much. This has been great.
No worries.
And hopefully it won't be too long before we can do this again at some point.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. I thank you, everybody, for watching. Obviously, yeah, it's been turned into more sort of a podcast-style thing, but I thought that was going to be the case anyway, so I hope you've enjoyed this chat. And I'll see you in the next video of Fear of Dracula very soon. Bye-bye.